Ta-da. All right, start this recording. Listen out for the clap. Sound signal. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Reloved Guitars from the Newish workshop. And what have we got here? You know what it is already. You can guess. You can guess. Well, what will help you to guess is that. That's right. And that tells you it's an Epiphone. And zooming out tells you it's an Epicenter episode 339, ES339, and in a beautiful scarlety crimson red with a very light coloured fretboard and a plastic nut, which will be coming right off and being replaced by this little fella. Ready, shaped, made yesterday, ready shaped to go in place. But yes, look at that, for a light coloured fingerboard. Don't know what the wood is. Somebody smarter than me will be able to tell you. But a beautiful looking thing. They are, aren't they? Double bound, can't go wrong. Scratch plate with an embossed E for Epiphone. And da-da-da-da, all that lovely expanse of shiny red stuff. Made in China. But don't hold that against it. By the way, I haven't got skin disease. That's from spray painting earlier on. Hard to get off unless you put some thinners on, or a lot of thinners onto it. Okay, so this is James's 339, and I guess I'm going to place the camera up here, or if I can get it to clip on without anything dropping on the floor. Sort of over the shoulder view again. Haven't figured out another way to film things. Yeah, kind of difficult really. I could shoot from here maybe, but then you're up close all the time, so you've got a long-ish shot there, but even if you're up close, what you can't have is everything in focus, so you have to probably have to pick a certain spot to zoom into it. So let's do something that's feasible. If that was the hot spot, I can bring that to there, but I can't quite bring that to there. So that was the hot spot. Actually, currently, do I have enough room? There's the body being focused on, there's the neck. Right, let's see if we can work off the back of that. Prepping my, oh Christ, wrong button, sorry. Let's go in for the, of course the zoom gets really crazy anyway. If I go too far in, it just doesn't look any good. So really, what we want to be is less zoomy, more up closery, which is kind of difficult to do. Sorry about this. I just had the pleasure of sending up a load of, uploading is the word, a load of want this around the other side now, don't I? Yeah, gosh. A load of videos to YouTube yesterday, courtesy of my partner in crime in the US of A. That's not going to work, it's going to be this way around. Bert, who's very kindly set up a laptop in his home for me to dial into. Now that sounds very old-fashioned. It's not dialing, is it? To log into, and I can use his home broadband, ridiculously fast speeds, to upload my videos. So he got, well, you know what, let's just call it there. Centre of action. Ta-da! So I have to remember to do this and so on. Okay. Yeah, so Bert kindly uploaded, or let me use his bandwidth. And it feels very funny because, you know, these SD card takes 10 days in the post, or something like that, a week to 10 days, and it arrives there. He chucks it on the laptop, and I log in with TeamViewer, and then I can log into YouTube from there and upload my videos from his machine. And it took about half an hour, 40 minutes yesterday, and that would have taken me literally, not joking, all week of constant internet usage from home. So yeah, it was great to do. So I couldn't believe how quick it was. All right, so just looking down here, we're going to take the nut off this because it's a horrible plastic one, and actually you can probably hear, actually don't play anything, you might be able to hear it pinging. If I shut up. Yeah, horribly pinging. So we're going to get rid of that nut and replace it with a decent one, an adjustable Tusq one. Somebody asked me in a message on Facebook the other day, is there really a situation in which someone would actually use the adjustable nut on their guitar? And actually, yes, there is, and it may not be that common particularly. Hopefully it's not that common. Hopefully most things stay the same on your guitar and don't require adjustment. But changes in environment, changes in string gauge, just a change in preference allows you the freedom to raise or lower it, and just to see how much difference that will make to the way the guitar plays. And so to have that freedom to do it is a pretty cool thing. The real benefit of the adjustable Tusk Nut is that it does away with, first of all, any of this friction and pinging which puts your guitar out of tune. But the most important thing is that it allows me to bring the strings up, or allows you to bring the strings up to the ideal first fret action without cutting into the slots. So we can use the factory smooth slots that this nut came with, and we can bring the nut up to where it should be, as opposed to cutting into it. And no matter how well you cut into it, or with what sort of expensive files, the reality is that your files will scar the slots. It's not the end of the world. Slots that we have cut with files still, if they're Tusq, play really well. But if they're any other material, it's difficult. It's very difficult to get it to play without some sort of friction. Now I'm just checking what currently the last fret action is on here, and it's actually about 2.1, 2.2 on the lower E, and it's, if I can just see this without dropping the guitar, it's about 1.5 on the high E. So that's good. Next thing I'm going to just check, and I'm going to do it visually to begin with, is the, actually I'll support this with there, is just check the relief, which is about 0.15, something like that. It's actually spot on where I'd want it. Another person asked a question, which was an interesting question. They said, instead of, what did they say? Instead of using feeler gauges at the first fret, could they not tell whether the nut was at the right height if, when they pressed the string at the first fret, if when they fretted that note there, for example, if that was a perfect F sharp, then surely that tells you the nut is at the right height. And that's actually true in principle. The only problem with that, I mean, that's true, and it doesn't really change the principle that what we want is the lowest possible workable first fret action, and ideally a little room to go up and down to 0, which you don't have on a normal nut. So yes, if you picked up a guitar and you played it and everything stayed beautifully in tune, which that isn't, then of course you could say, well, that's just about right. The truth is, if that first fret action was too high, you would note that your fretted notes on the first and second fret would probably be sharp. Oh, it took so long to pull through. That lag in the pitch changing when I started tuning that G tells you just how badly the nut is clutching or holding onto the strings. Now, you know, some people think, oh, well, that's nothing, you know, it's just a tiny little detail, why are you getting all, you know, how can you charge loads of money to just you're only fiddling with the nut. Actually, what you're doing is you're making sure the guitar does the number one thing that it's meant to do. Namely, if I could find where I've put my screwdriver, namely, to play and stay in tune. And for me, that's the number one thing. He said, not putting any part of the guitar in focus. Playing and staying in tune is the number one thing that we want our guitar to do. Now, some people, when you're young, perhaps when me too, when I started playing, you don't really pay attention to that. You're kind of focused on how the guitar looks, you know, what the brand name on the headstock is, type of thing, all those exciting details, and the, you know, the grain, the flame pattern on the front and so on. But over time, what you'll probably find is if your guitar doesn't play first of all and then also stay in tune when you play it, it actually quickly falls out of favour. And you know, the danger is you'd end up being one of those people who say, I've got this beautiful ES339 at home, but I honestly, it won't stay in tune and I practically can't play it, which is all too common a story, and I had that with guitars myself in the past. So, this is just refusing to let go of the string. So it's a common experience, but it just totally ruins the experience of playing the guitar. So that's why I ended up in my time spending so much time and effort on the nut. And an important thing for anyone to know that I found is the tuning stability of your guitar is down to two important factors. The first one is the nut. The height of the slots to avoid going out of tune or going sharp when you're pressing frets down here, or usually when you're playing open chords. Also making sure you've got a nut that has no friction at all, and that plastic one there is an example of a terrible one which will never stay in tune. The other 50% of your tuning stability is down to the amount of unreleased slack still in your strings, and if you don't stretch them out the way you'll see me do this at the end, the guitar still also won't stay in tune, because for years to come it will still be leaching out the slight bit of slack. So for example, I just tuned that up now, and I don't know how long the strings have been on here, but let's just say we go and give it a pull. Right, now I'm doing this very deliberately and very hard, but when you're playing it, it does that very, very slightly, but still pulls a bit of that slack out and detunes, but it does it every time you play it, or play a chord too hard, or play a lead piece or something. So the truth is, it will continue to shed that excess slack for years if you don't bring it out manually. Now, you'll sometimes see on forums and in magazines and stuff, people writing in and saying, oh, my guitar won't stay in tune, and people go, oh, it's your terrible tuners, look at those cheap Chinese-made Clouson style, well, rubbish, everyone knows they're rubbish, go and buy the £80, £90 set of hip shot tuners, they're the only ones that will stay in tune. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. If you hear someone say that, or you read someone saying that, you've got a good sign that they don't actually understand what they're saying. The tuners have almost nothing to do, and I would say nothing, to all intents and purposes, nothing to do with your guitar staying in tune. The only time your guitar will go out of tune because of the tuners will be if you haven't wound on enough string for it to grip, or you've used a locking tuner and you haven't put just the right pressure on to keep it in place, and or haven't wound anything on. Locking tuners can be deceptive. They can make you think they're going to hold it. You can do it first of all up too tight and the string breaks, and you can't afford to keep doing that, so you can be tempted to tighten it up too little, in which case it doesn't hold the string. So user pilot error can cause the tuners to be implicated in guitars going out of tune. But with a standard set of tuners, even if they're made by the billions in China, they have nothing to do with the tuning stability on your guitar. It has everything to do with the nut first, or 50-50 nut, unreleased slack. You get those two things right, which is what I do in this setup, it will play and stay in tune. That's number one. Second priority on my kind of adult view of what's important on a guitar, not the same when I was a kid. It was, you know, all about brand and looks and number of pickups and a very Spinal Tap, or you know, that sort of thing. But second thing that I learned over time was the most important. First was play and stay in tune. Second one was it's light and easy to play, and we achieved that after we've done the nut and the slack. We do the slack last, but after we've done the nut and the slack, we make it easy to play by making sure we've got a low action at this end, which we've taken care of with the nut, and also at this end. And to do that, the only thing limiting normally our ability to set a low action to make it light and easy to play are the uneven frets that are in this fretboard here. So the amount of unevenness only has to be absolutely minuscule for it to stop you lowering the guitar to a lower, more preferable action, if that's what you like. Some people don't like that, and that's absolutely fine. There's no no judgment on it. Some people like a high action, they're used to it, and that's great. A lot of customers, beginners, or customers that come to me do so because they want a low action without buzzing and fretting. And the only way to get that is to tame the underlying frets. Now, most guitars that you will have had, if you go and buy a guitar second-hand, most of them will come to you with the action set pretty much by the previous owner as low as it will go without the uneven frets that are in the fretboard interfering with play. And so what happens is you may get it home and you'll lower it down a little bit and you'll get buzzing, and you go back up to where the previous owner probably had it. The only way to get any better than that, or any lower if that's what you want, is to level the frets. And that actually, that thing about it, the only way to get a better action or a lower action is to level the frets, is why a lot of I don't like this being right in the middle. This isn't the greatest arrangement I've ever come up with. Anyway, it's also one of the reasons why quite often I hear tales of people taking their guitars to guitar techs who offer a light setup or a basic setup that might charge 35, 40 quid for. And in doing so, it's very common for the customer to expect there to be a change in how their guitar feels, because they're kind of either explicitly or implicitly they really want the luthier, the tech, to lower the action for them, make it lighter and easier to play. Now, often those same customers get the guitar back with the action either the same, in some cases a little bit higher, and that's a recipe for unhappiness, because the first thing you're going to think is you spent your 35, 40 quid on nothing. Okay, you've got an oiled fingerboard, you've got some new strings on, maybe a bit of crackling is gone or something from the pots, but by and large, I've heard so many people come back or talk about coming back from a luthier or a tech disappointed because the guitar isn't any easier to play. And the reason it isn't is because the luthier tech, let's call it a tech, call them a guitar tech. The guitar tech has not, well, it hasn't done fret leveling, and the reason they haven't is either because maybe they don't have it in their repertoire of techniques, or quite common is that they would charge a lot more for it, and they're frightened to charge for it or say that the guitar will need it because it will frighten the customer off. On the other hand, I never did a light setup in my life. I kind of found out pretty early on that a vast majority of guitars would need the frets leveling. So I just said that's what a setup is. It's all of that. So that's why the setup takes 3 hours. Somebody criticised on YouTube the other day saying, 3 hours? 3 hours? Yeah, it's 3 hours because you'll see there's fret leveling, there's polishing the frets, there's you know, masking off the fretboard. There's a time you haven't even seen, about 40 minutes to make that. Some time yesterday, about 15 minutes yesterday, and about half an hour or a bit more today. All right, that's all part of it. And then there'll be the precision leveling and the polishing out, recraning, and then polishing out with the Dremel at the end and so on. And all of that, a lot of that won't be on camera because it's just too noisy and boring, but I'll tell you what I'm doing. But even still, you know, the whole thing takes about 3 hours, and that's why it costs what it costs. Now, if you, like I say, if you pay 40 quid, you won't, unless somebody's doing it like a charity and they're not making any money, or they don't value their time, then they won't be doing fret leveling, and chances are you'll get it back. And many of you will, possibly all of us will have that experience. You bring it back and it plays worse or higher, or it's the same chokes. And then often I've heard techs will say things like, oh, well, ES339s are always meant to have that higher action. They're not meant to be played with low action. This is a jazz thing, you see. And there's all kinds of reasons why the action's no lower than it was. Well, the simple reason is that neck almost certainly has got uneven frets. It's got nothing, no fault of the tech, no fault of the buyer. It's just the manufacturing process. It's very imprecise. I can't lay a set of frets and get them all in perfectly. I have to level my frets as well. So all frets need leveling if you want a low action, simple as that. And you have to pay for it if you want it. And some people don't want the low action, that's great. So anyway, so what we've got here is we've got the action here set where I want. The neck relief curvature was already good. The nut action, the first fret action is pretty good here, but we don't want this nut because it's plastic and it's gripping. So we're going to take that off, but we've got the three main components kind of where we are. We could level the frets like this and just go straight ahead and do this, not worry about the tuning stability part, and do the nut after that. Which do I prefer to do? Yeah, we could do that. We might as well, and take that off once we've got the strings off. Doesn't really change things at all. So what I'm going to do before, and again this is where the camera angle is absolutely crap. At the ideal action, let's see how it now plays. Now that rattle there, if I can reproduce it. That's spring rattle in the bridge, which is one of the reasons I hate tunematic bridges. Just one. Oh, just one. There's a bit of a dead fret there. Perfect. Well, in terms of notes, one or two very small, that's sticking up a little bit. You might want to, I would like to get some super glue on there, except oh no, it's stuck down. That's good. But it'll probably come up again. Yeah, most of the notes are okay. The A and the E aren't that good at that action. Ooh. Sympathetic. Yeah, low. The E and the A are not great at that action and that amount of relief. Now I know that a bit of fret leveling will just create a little bit more room. This isn't technically uneven frets causing that buzz. Right? This is not enough room for the strings, or what I would call fret slap, which is a different distinction. But there's one or two dead notes up here, like that, which could do with just a whiff of leveling. So I'm going to do it, and when I come to this side, we'll clear up a bit of that fret slap. What we don't know at this point in time is, are there any choke outs? That's good. Ooh. A couple of frets there, not good, or a high one following. So actually this is unusually good in the sense that normally when I bend up here on a very low action, you'll get unevenness in the G track will show up as you bend across. I don't know what you can see here. No, you can't see my hand at all. Yeah, this is what I should be doing. Normally, somewhere around about here, when you're bending on the high notes, you'll discover some uneven frets in what I call the G track around about here. So as you bend the E string over, is when it'll choke out. But actually this isn't bad up here, but there are a couple of dead notes up here. So this is a pretty good fretboard by and large, and really all it needs is a little bit of leveling to get it to where it should be. The action's now low. It's at the lowest I would ever aim to set, but it's not a bad thing to set that as the target. And I would only raise that in circumstances where there was something preventing us from getting the ideal low action. And occasionally that can be a low fret or a group of low frets, and bizarrely that can sometimes be the case. Sometimes if someone's hammered them in a bit further than normal, or maybe if it's a second-hand guitar, somebody may have tried to sand out a problem there, which might have involved I don't know, some chips in the frets, and they've just taken a block and a bit of sandpaper and very carefully got rid of that problem. But in doing so, you may create a little trough, and then the problem happens is when you fret a note or press the string to a fret that is in a ditch or lower than the others. It makes all the frets in front of it that way higher, relatively speaking. So it's not a brilliant situation, and it's quite common. And when you get low frets, you usually get one or two of them in a sort of cluster. And the challenges you have is you've only really got one option, and that is to basically bring the surrounding frets down to a point where it kind of bottoms out the low one, which is, sorry, I'm in your way now, but anyway, which is quite daunting, because you're taking material from all the frets around it in order to cure the problem. The only feasible other way to alleviate that problem, well, there's two feasible ways. One is not to lower your action, so you avoid the problem area altogether. Sometimes when you've got nothing else in your arsenal, you have to do that, and that's very often what a manufacturer will do, or a retailer will do, as they send the guitar out. That's partly why they'll end up with the action set where it is. And the other alternative when you have a significantly or relatively significant low fret or series of low frets is you potentially would have to replace the fret to bring it back up. Now the difficulty in that is if it's a brand new guitar, you shouldn't have low frets that are so low that you need to replace them. But even if you did, you'd have trouble matching the fret wear exactly. If you knew what it was, you might stand a chance. But even if you knew what it was, if the guitar was a year or so old, then you would have no real chance of wearing the replacement frets down to anywhere close to what the original frets currently are. So it's not a very good option. As it happens, most of the time, in all my experience, let's put this where you can actually see it, right? In my experience, I've never had to replace the frets. It's always been better to wear down the surrounding frets. I can just get my magnetic tools. I've got some magnets there that are almost too heavy, too powerful to use. Yeah, so I've always managed to get down, and it's always less metal than I think it's going to be, but it usually feels quite daunting to do it. Okay, Now there's a couple of little dings down here, and that's a little chip on the fret down here on the second, I think it was. But so if there's wear down here, or there's a little bit of damage, we'll hopefully clean that up in the process of doing this leveling. So I think I'm gonna just try and move you a bit, only because I'm struggling to get in next to the guitar and go where I need to be. Go where I'm going. Stay there. This magic arm is absolutely brilliant, but it's hard to know what I'm looking at. So we can see from there to there. Right, so for fret leveling, I use my time-honoured banana tool, and this is a rod and bar truss rod that came from, in this case, a Squire Affinity Strat, and it's got 400 grit paper stuck to it. This is self-adhesive paper, but you can use self-adhesive double-sided tape if you haven't got sticky-backed 400 grit, and you can put whatever grit you want on. 400 grit is a fairly safe grit to kick off with. You don't want to go much lower than that. Occasionally in the past, when I've really wanted to take a lot of material in a hurry, I've gone 220, but 400, and if you're feeling nervous, start with 600 if it's your first go. Better to take longer and do less damage. Now I say damage, I don't mean damage as in unwanted damage, but do less shifting of metal, shall we call it. So what I'm doing is I'm using the truss rod to very carefully calibrate this tool so that its curve matches as close as possible the kerf on the fretboard. That's a typesetting term, isn't it? Kerf. Anyway, and that means that I have sampled the neck at 3 points using those brass feet, and I've made my bar rod and bar truss rod mimic that shape, and I'm then going to place it on there and use it to level the frets. Now the interesting thing about that is that although providing that the truss rod bends in a fairly uniform manner, which you can't scientifically prove, you just have to hope it does, or you can have to eyeball it and see. If it had a great big kink in it somewhere, you wouldn't use it. But the truss rod approximates a nice smooth curve, and sometimes it's more smoothly curved than the neck. Sometimes the neck will go a wobble, and the truss rod will actually be smoother than the neck actually is. Even though you've taken a point there, and point there, the truss rod averages out the curve represented by those 3 mathematical points. But what's quite good is that where that is the case, it gently takes down the sticky up bit of the hump, and it doesn't do anything to the other bit that's below. Kind of, it works out. It's quite a nice thing when you put that idealized curve onto a flawed curve. The idealized curve kind of just gently imposes its ideal curve onto the flawed thing. So what I do is I begin by running the truss rod file up, backwards and forwards, and I just do a little bit and stop. And what I'm seeing is I'm touching here and mostly down here. There's one high fret here, which has caused those nasty chokes that we heard on the B string, and it's touching right up there. So I'm getting about there and there contact, but I'm not getting any contact in this section. Now that could be because the first thing I would suspect on this method is my calibration. So I'm going to stop. I'm just going to in fact what I'll do is I'll put the string back on under normal tension, roughly normal tension, and then I'll recalibrate. So if you don't cut at some point fairly consistently all the way along, suspect the calibration of the tool. Okay, so I'm going to put it back on here and I'm going to look critically. Did I get it close? It suggests that I'm missing, I'm not down low enough in the middle, but this tells me I am. So having convinced myself that I've got the curve right and it's matching those 3 points, what it tells me is that we have got a slight low section here. So we've got kind of straight, curves down a bit further, comes back up, and we're not getting into that curve with this truss rod. And that's an interesting example of the not very straight, and you wouldn't be able to see it with your eyes, but it's not entirely a smooth curve. Now if I press down a little bit more, what will happen, just a tiny bit more push, the truss rod will press into it, that will give me a sense of just how far off the curve it really was, and it's immediately started cutting, so it's minuscule amounts of difference. So I'm not going to worry about pushing down in it. I'm going to let it, because I know that the amount of difference between where that little low spot is and where the truss rod sandpaper is minuscule. I know that a little bit of working on these frets either side of it will eventually, or not too long, bring us down to those frets as well, so we will make contact with them all. So looking at this now, I can see that what we've got, it's got pretty much everything touching now, so it wasn't a big deal. There is a low fret here, and another one here. After all of that, 2 low frets, so these were low but not as low as these two, and we've got one particularly high one here, which is cutting up more than everything else. In fact, it's probably worth taking you off here. Sorry about the noise. It's very difficult to pull you away from there. So let's describe them to you. So, okay, cutting, not much, so a little bit lower, standard, a little bit higher, much higher, or relatively higher, standard, a little bit higher, okay, higher, okay, a little bit lower than that one, okay, much higher here. You can see that one, that's significantly higher. Higher at the edge, but nothing right there. These two untouched, low as well, cutting those so they're all about the same. So this gives you a sort of portrait of the wibbly undulations of this neck, which is really interesting, because you would no way would you see that with your bare eyes. Now, whether or not you'd see it if you put it on a Plek machine is another question, but this cost absolutely nothing, whereas the Plek machine costs however much it costs you to get your digital readout. Now, my question at this point is, on that one that was very high, have we taken enough off it to make those notes behind it play okay? And the next question is, do the notes here play okay? In fact, this little crop here, because they're lower than the following ones, and technically that probably makes them buzz out a little bit. So let's find the ones, where's the high one? Right, so this one, now that's making the screw and the spring vibrate, which I can't stop because I can't push anything in there, but okay, that's enough. Oh, let's try the B. Actually, we're not on the B yet. So that's fine. Everything's playing there. So what I've taken off in that pass is enough to sort out the differences between the high frets and the low frets. And they're a combination of both. So if you think of an imaginary middle line, a median, where the average of all of them, or where most of them sort of fall, you'll get some that are higher than that, which show up as this one that gets cut more, and there are some that are lower than that, which show up as having none of the marker pen removed at all. So that's really an interesting telltale. It gives you a clear idea of what's going on. So I've suddenly lost my technique because I'm looking at this from a slightly different angle. Okay, so now we're doing the B track. I'm kind of sliding this backwards and forwards across the radius just to kind of cover a fairly wide area on the curve of the radius, and let's just see what it tells us. Okay, same as before. That one's high, really high. These three, actually 4 of them now, are looking low. Those are all cutting, and everything up here is cutting as well, with a few a little bit higher than the others. So it's a high one, a low one below the radar, above the radar, 4 below the radar, and there are other three. Okay, so we want to check the one before the very high one that we're clearly cutting something off. Let's see if it plays okay. Get anywhere near the. I need some marks on the. That's what they do in show business, isn't it? They have their marks where they stand. Now you hear that on all of these notes, the bridge is buzzing, and that's because there are no springs involved. There's a little tie clip. Is that, you know what I mean? A little retainer clip, spring clip, theoretically to hold the screws in, but yeah, hear the difference. I don't know if you can hear that, but this is a completely different note. Well, it's got a different aftertone when it's pressed in. So this needs a dab of something on it. I've got some low strength Loctite, and once we've got the whole thing done and we've got new strings on and everything's done, I will put a tiny dab, like at the end of a cocktail stick, and we'll put a dab of Loctite. It's very low viscosity stuff, or low strength, on each of these. So that they stop rattling, because it's a horrible effect that you get with these guitars with tunematic bridges. Okay, so I'm still haven't really convinced myself how this plays, because I'm hearing the rattles. Isn't that awful? I haven't got enough hands to do that, play it and hold something in there. But okay, that's playing too, so that's okay. Now I'm checking down here to see if there's any marks where that's showing up on the fretboard, on the lower frets, and at the moment I can't see anything obvious. But there was a little ding on one of them, a bit of damage, so we should hopefully come across that in a minute and clear it up. Now this one's showing that we're now a little bit short of the bend, so tiny bit more curvature in here to meet up with this middle one, and that is about right. In fact, if anything, it's just a fraction too much, and I couldn't even show you the degree to which I turned this. It's so small an amount. Now I've lost it again. No, we're on, it's just on. So now the G track. The reason I'm doing this leveling now with the old nut still on is because the first fret action is pretty much where we want it anyway, and because there's nothing about that plastic nut or its lack of a keeping tune that's relevant at this point in time for this operation. This is only about relative levelness of the frets, and the nut really doesn't feature in that. Okay, that is really high, that fret there. That's been a problem. Okay, everything else is cutting fine, and I'm going to just whiz up and down. So the thing about this method, which I like, and I've said this so many times now, it must be boring. The thing I like about this method, where would I be? I'd be somewhere there, is that because the strings are still on, still rattling down here. Literally can't stop it. Yeah, because the strings are still on, you can find out whether your leveling has done the required or had the desired effect by playing it. And that's all I go by, is have I cleared up the problem I had a minute ago, and if so, that's fine, I don't level any further. And it's because of that, I think it's a little bit more, a little gentler in terms of how costly it is in fret metal. It's much less costly, I should have said in the first place. Anyway, which is not a bad thing in my book, is to preserve life, fret metal life, I should say, and playing life. But actually, in reality, the method, almost more importantly, the method allows me to hear the improvement, so I know, and I have the confidence to know, that I've taken away a bit of buzzing or a bit of a choke, And so I know the method works, I know the process works, and I know that I've made the improvement and I can move on. Okay, so cutting all the way across all of these, more again on that one. These are touching a little bit now, but it's followed the same pattern all the way through, with one really high and a patch of low ones up there. And again, we'll just check the improving a tiny bit more on there, and then move on. So you can see that I'm recalibrating after each track that I do to get the leveling beam to map the curve at that point. And believe it or not, the curve does change as you go across. Not a huge amount, but a tiny little bit is possible. So doing this in slices or tracks allows us to adjust as we go, make sure that the truss rod is, wherever possible, is following the curve. So now we're in the A, and remember the A had quite a lot of associated fret slap, sort of general low action buzz, which is characterized by being audible or perceivable on all the frets all the way up. There doesn't seem to be that much difference. Fret buzz, where you're working on uneven frets or you're encountering uneven frets, tends to be in a number of specific places. You'll find it here, here and here, or you find low frets and then there'll be buzz because they're low. But it's specific. Fret slap was that sound on the A and the E, which is still there a little bit. Which is here most of the way up, except for when you get right to here and there's no more string. Now just check the playing the string action here on the A. And that is actually too low. Sometimes what you find, I think it was too low anyway, but sometimes what you also find is that the radius on the bridge isn't exactly an accurate 12-inch radius, and so that you find that here's an example. So if that was a 12-inch radius and this is a 12-inch board, these two should be the same height. This is 1.5 and this is 1.1, 1.2. That one's even low, 1.2. So this is flatter radius than the actual fingerboard, and that's another piece of garbage to my mind about the Tune-o-matic bridge. Nobody actually ever checks. I don't think the QA sections of any of these companies check to ensure that it genuinely is the same radius as the necks they manufacture. Now the only way you're actually going to make sure that it is will be to actually manually adjust and file these slots, and I tend not to do it on people's guitars because the difference is small enough to just raise the action a little bit. But possibly if it was mine, I would probably, if I was that bothered, I would go over and I would cut and edit each of these slots. Now I've seen people talk about this in guitar forums and stuff, and they get very, very vexed by the subject, and a lot of the opinion is you must never do such a thing. Cutting into your nuts, your saddle slots is kind of sacrilege. Well, of course it's ridiculous. It's not sacrilege at all. If you've got a bridge that's mass produced in a Chinese factory, that over the years nobody's really checked that closely, and in fact that bridge to me looks like it's flatter than the radius of the neck. So I don't know what the original radius here is, but that's probably flatter than 12, and this is probably could even be tighter than 12. So the difference between the two is you've got a curved thing and a flat thing over the top, and it means the ends, the gap is higher, in the middle it's lower. That shouldn't be the case. It should be 12 and 12, but that's Chinese or mass production, not Chinese, that's just mass production for you. But that's definitely not a 12-inch radius on that bridge. Well, sorry, let's not be certain about that. It could be a 12-inch radius, in which case this is more like a 9.5. So something is mismatched between the two of them, and since they were made by the same people in the same factory for the same guitar, that's their QA problem, quality control problem, not mine. But you know, you can see that we're turning up an issue with it, and it's why. Sorry, the reason I bring that up is because if I can even get this nice and low here, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got the E playing without too much buzz, suddenly the A is going to buzz more because actually it's nearly 0.5 millimeter lower because of the way this radius, or even because the slots aren't cut right. So somewhere in the manufacture of this, whether it's the actual initial setting of all the pieces or whether it's in fact the crude making of the slots so they aren't accurate, somewhere in all of that, the strings and the way they seat on the bridge, see, that's much better. See, that is much better, and that shows that this E can comfortably live 1.5. Right, in fact I might go just a tad lower, just to get it exactly where I want it. 1.5, right? But that's not bad, but the A still has some slap in it, and that is because the A is, I would say, nearly, I think it's about, actually, you know what, it's just under 0.5 millimeter lower, and that is because these two things are not accurate. Now, I've looked at these things in the past and I've not been able to see whether there's any sequence. If you could imagine if there was a slot cut for the E and one for the D, and in fact they got mixed up so that the E string in the D slot was sitting higher than it should, then it could account for it. But I can't find any significant difference between these on this kind of Chinese made guitar. I've seen the difference on other older guitars, like maybe something like an old Ibanez or something from the 70s. There's been literally some deliberate individual notches cut for each string, and consequently the strings will sit at the right height. But this thing looks like a standard piece, which means the truth is your high E, the larger the strings are, the higher they're going to sit out of the slot, which means this one sits out. But this one seems to be sit too low, as does the, so maybe it's just the E that doesn't fit into this sequence. So the slots just happen to be large enough for the D and the A string to sit into them, and that would be the default correct height of this bridge. But I think because the E string is not cut for the E, then the E sits high compared to the other ones. So I think it's a slot in the saddle problem. The question is, is there a difference on the E side? I doubt there is, because if we applying the same logic, we should find that the difference between the E string and the B string is so small that the slot won't make any difference. And that's what we've got. We've got a slot here that is the wrong size for this thing. Now I think it's worth having a quick look and see if we can adjust it. The other thing about this, which I could rant about this forever, and it might be worth, I don't know if you can see this, right? Let's do a little something here a minute. I don't know how long this will hold up for without breaking. Let's do a little something here. You can stay there for a minute. Okay. The thing that's really stupid about these things, which nobody ever, or the manufacturer doesn't seem to care about, on these guitars they tend to send the pieces out like this. On this, I'll show you how it is on this one. Right, there's your high E. There's a little top of the thing, and then there's a notch like that. Okay, and then you've got the B, goes like that, and then there's a notch like that. And the idea is, the string runs up there from the stop bar and launches off at that point there. You go and do its work as a playing string. Then you get to the wound strings, and they've done a thing. Let's call this the B and let's call this the G. And then here we've got, oh look, we've got the D, and we've got the A. And if you look at it, the reason that this little thing I've drawn here, this little chamfer chevron thing, what we haven't said on this is that this slopes away downwards in that direction, and here this slopes away downwards in that direction, right? And they're meant to be this way, right? That's how they come. But this notch here on each of them, the notch is a slope. So in this one, it looks like there's the notch there, if you could see it inside the metal. So the notch is kind of like that, right? Which, if you think about it, if it was here, let's draw this one, it's like that, okay? And the notch is like that, yeah? You can see that? Yeah, you can see that. So on the correct way round, on the B, the string comes kind of from the stop bar, hits there, lands in the little slope, runs up to the front of the nut and jumps off, right? And that's a clean start point. It's like a fulcrum, a pivot, right? But it is that way. It starts exactly there because the slope runs up, and that's the top of the slope, where the top of the slope meets the front edge. This one, string comes up here at that same angle, that's sloping downwards, that little notchy slope, and this comes off the top there like that. Guess where the intonation point is? Probably more like there, whereas this one's at the front edge, right? So this is the back edge of the block, okay? And that it's not even so much that what we don't know is if this slope here was below, well below the string, then that's okay, because it would still make a clean fulcrum, whatever you call it, pivot there, and it would play cleanly. We just need to know visually, and the intonation would set okay if you'd have to push it back that way. Now the problem is if this little slope here, and we don't know because it's almost impossible to see it up close, if that little slope is not much of a slope, then what happens is you've got a completely different thing. It looks like your intonation point's here, but this could be sitting flat on there, and it will change the intonation point, but worst of all, it will kill the note. And that's what I worry about, having these things turn different directions and with the crudeness of these slots. So anyway, as I said, the first thing we can tell is that the height of this slot is wrong. So I can guarantee you that. And I can tell simply by measuring this, and it's the only one out of the whole series that's wrong. It's about 0.5 millimeter. So I'm going to cure it for you, because there's no point not. Right? Now this will require a little bit of filing, but on top of that it'll probably require a little bit of careful sanding. So I'm going to go straight across the slot with this diamond file, and I want it to cut into the slot. Now until I sand it, it's going to start off by being rough, but it's not that bad a problem. We could probably just leave it like that, and once we get to the right height it won't do anything to anyone. Okay, about that. 1, 2. That's nearly there actually. It's only a very small adjustment, but it's annoyingly enough to be wrong. And what it means is, I'll now then I'll be able to raise the whole bridge, and that will then lift the A string out of the danger zone, because at the moment the A string is too low when we've got the E string right. As you can see, often there's a problem with the G in there as well. I bet you the G is slightly out too. Yeah, the G is out. It's always out. I'm going to do the G as well. 1.5. Still a little bit high. The G is always out as well, that's what annoys me. Possibly for the same reason. It could well be that the slot isn't good enough for that, but I think it's just inaccurate. I think the slots are of various crudeness of cut. So just a little annoyance there, really. Okay. Okay, we've got exactly 1.6 and we're under, so this is still. Now I'm just going to double check something here. Yeah, make sure that's down. These are such badly made little things. Sometimes they're sitting up and won't drop down fully. They're not under load or something. So you don't quite know how they're seated as well, which is really not very good. So this is just a process of stopping and checking. Okay, now we're on just on 1.5. Still fractionally high, so I'm just going to get a nut file, just widen the slot a little bit because that may be the problem now. This will also have the effect of rounding it out a little bit. So there's things like this that take extra time. Okay, we are on 1.3. 1.3, that's almost spot on. Do a tiny little bit more. Yeah, that's the funny part, is that, you know, when you do it, check it against the radius here, and you find out that it doesn't match because of something they've done in the manufacturing process. Such a pity. But they are crude devices, these. That's the bottom line. Okay. We are nearly there. I'm just going to do a little tiny fraction more. Then we're going to do the G because that's also a mile off. And I keep seeing it on these guitars for some reason. Sit in properly. Okay, that's on the mark. Good. Now the G, you can see it sticking up. A country mile, that's sitting at 1.5 there. The D is at 1.1, 1.2. The G jumps up to 1.5, and the B is back at 1.1. So there's nearly 0.5 millimeters difference, which doesn't make this thing play as well as it should. And then you know, you can hear these things rattling when you take the string off them. Okay, so we'll have one for the G. And this one's running upwards. Ugh. Don't forget, I'll come back and sand these. Sorry about the view, it's not great. Actually, that's nearly done in one go. Yes, that's spot on. Okay, just a bit of sandpaper next. Right, I'm glad I went and did that because it annoys me. It's a very common thing, unfortunately. Okay, So we're done with the fret leveling. Now that means we can have make sure the E now is at 1.5. It doesn't no point being lower because now we've got it set properly. Get that to the correct height. 1.5, 1.1, which is now all over the place with the tuning. Fine, filthy. Okay, let's get this off to the side a minute. Fret leveling stuff over there. Thank you. Okay, sorry, that was close up, gone, moved. So you got my drift, and I forgot to zoom in. But anyway, we can see all of that on the other camera, couldn't we? Yes, definitely. Squeaky squeak. Stay. Don't go anywhere else, will you? Thank you. Okay. Right. So, having sorted that out, and we'll get a bit of 400 grit sandpaper. 600. That's 1,000. We'll do 600. I'll do 600 grit. And I'll do when the strings are off, I'll do the D and the G very carefully with the sandpaper. So we've now got the frets leveled for this action, solved the bridge problem. We're now going to change the nut over, so it's time to take off the strings. And again, old strings like this, I'm going to take them off because I don't want to, I've been pulling them on, taking them off to do the fret leveling. I don't want to use these as strings to play with. So they're coming off and they'll go on my magnetic ball to do a setup with. So they're sacrificial strings for another throwaway setup. And so what follows next is changing the nut while the strings are off. While the strings are off, then I can recrown the frets. So we get rid of the flat spot that we put onto them by leveling them and return them to a nice arch shape. And then after that we will clean everything, check everything over, and then we'll put some oil on the board and restring it with some new strings. I'm just going to put that off to one side for a minute. So we're done with this. I can take the protective sticky tape off there. Note to self, must buy some more. Now we're going to remove the nut with a tried and tested technique, which is a very gentle tap. You can hear it crack and it starts to move, and then I'm going to lift it out the slot rather than tilt it over backwards, because there's a kind of lip of, or a built up buttress of finish up there, and this comes off pretty cleanly but with a very small amount of neck wood on it, but that's not a problem. It's hardly any, but plastic nut can go there. Now when you remove a nut, you always want to just scrape gently to clean off any obvious residue of glue, any sort of chunks of glue that are going to get in the way of seating a new nut. Now this is interesting under here. It's not actually very even. This I don't know what you call that thing, shelf. Okay, now just quickly looking at this, this nut is now still just a little bit too wide, and so what we'll do is we'll get the measuring device out. And we'll just check the original to confirm, and we've got a width here of 5.86 at one end and 5.9 at the other end. This will be 6.3 and 6.4. So we've got a bit of material to take off. Now I'm going to aim to take this from the back side of the nut, because I've got a nice clean face on the front side. So I'm going to take the extra distance off the back side, and to do that I will just press it down as firmly as possible and as evenly as I can, just try and remove some excess material. Check it for smoothness, double check the measurements again, see what we're chasing. We're chasing 5.9, we've got 6.2, 6.14, so a little bit more to go. Now once you've got close-ish to where you want to get to, we're on 608 and 600. Yeah, when you get to exactly where you want to be, then you can transfer to the finer paper, switch it around, and check. 587, 579, 588, 595. The numbers say this should fit. So it does. And it's a little bit, tiny bit looser at the one end than the other, and that's because this one is slightly fatter at one end than the other two. So there it is sitting, but it's telling me that is not a level slot. So that's the first thing I can notice about this. So I can also tell you that that's way too high. So I can, what I can do is, if I want to, I can mark this up with a pen. Let me find the right one. And we can get an initial close guesstimate what's got to come off the bottom of here, and I'm going to do that with a rasp in the vise. So we'll take a sort of bulk amount of material off and then come back to the fine tuning. But I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the state of the nut slot, because that is not, that's on a slope. I don't know why that is on a slope. In fact, put this back in. Yeah, you can see the base end sticking up. There's a not a very good slope in there. I just move this out of the way. We have a little nut file, nut slot file. I don't know what you can see at the moment. Right up there in the far end of everywhere. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this thing to stay put. Right, up at that end of things, I'm just looking at this. And if I put a flat edge across there, I can see it's way off level. That's awful. Is that factory done? Now the great thing about putting a new nut in is that's okay, we can cater for that, but if I put that on there now, that's why it's doing that, because it's a terrible bit of slottery. I'm not going to, and actually, you know what, I'd say I'm not going to, I should show you what it's like, because this is one of the things that, when something isn't right, oops, you do have to show the customer. Look at that. And that's already, I've scraped a little bit with a flat blade, the other side of this blade, which is why you see the light looking wood. Oops. But it's showing you that that is way off the flat there. Look at that. So it's high on the right hand edge. And you can actually see it from this edge, it just doesn't look right. Anyway, so we've got this, here we go, he's got the camera in his hands now. We got this file here, Hosco file, but I don't know, I got a feeling I could be, even with two hands, I could be here quite some time to get this right, but I think we have to do it. An alternative is that we've got a very fine slot style chisel, which would do a pretty good job in there, but it would have to come from the other side. So I'm going to put this back on its thingamajig, whatever this thing is. It's camera thing. There, that thing there. Okay. Switch that off a minute. It's kind of warm in here. I've been warming the room up because I'm going to do some spraying in a minute. So I'm going to switch the guitar around and I'm going to have a careful look with my, yeah, you can feel it. It doesn't even come up to the edge, there's not even a square edge at the edge of the paint part. So I'm just going to try with just using this very careful this chisel, using the rest of it as a flat base to start with. See if that feels a bit better. It's still, well, that's because it's right. Yeah, so it's still tilted up a bit. So we can have a look at this. Trying to keep this, the neck still. A little bit crude. These are sort of more suited for cutting into a telly or a strap slot, but actually it actually does the thing pretty well. Right, that's not bad. Okay, now that's a little bit better. Now we're just going to need to flatten this out a bit. First of all, I will go off camera and cut it down with that thing I mentioned, which is known as the Shinto Rasp. Very good for cutting down resin on these adjustable nuts and also on ordinary bone nuts as well. Okay, close, but no cigars. Okay, still too tall, that's all right. I'll take a bit more off. I've got to go and turn the dehumidifier on in the other room, get the spray zone ready. Because when I finish this setup, before I can go home, yeah, that's gone wandering, that's no good. I'm going to spray. I can't do this back to front. I can't do this back to front. I can't do that way either. Yeah, I'm going to do 2 more coats on Adam's Jaguar body, and then I can wear my mask for about 20 minutes while I do the first one, and then do the second one, and get out of there, let the smoke clear tomorrow. So I'm just kind of zooming in on or homing in on the correct height. I basically want to start with the strings. See, that's snug now. I want to start with the strings sitting in the slots, touching the first fret. So we're almost there, actually. So while we've got things where they are, I'm just going to bring up the sounding board. Okay, and now the trick now is to get this to the right height whilst keeping it flat, or the right angle on the bass, so it's 90 degrees to the front bass. Okay, so I'm getting a nice smooth finish, and that's almost perfect. It's not actually on that side, it's a little bit tall, so we can afford to tilt backwards a tiny bit, a little bit acute of an angle. Let's have a look, that's getting there. Now this should be sitting just about the right height, nice and low. I think, ladies and folks, that is almost spot on. Let's have a look, front edge sitting there, yeah, just about perfect. Such a I don't know, practice thing, getting the thing shaped right down where you want it and stopping at the exact point you want it at. So this is still not quite 100% flat, and I don't actually have anything to hand apart from this. I'm going to just do a little bit more with this Hosco block, because sanding the bottom of the nut won't improve this any further. What we've got to do now is just ensure that this is as good as it can be, and we know that that side's a bit off, so I'm just kind of hoping to get as flat a finish as possible. Little details, little surprises that you couldn't really predict, like just how crappy that nut surface was. Now this is I'm just going to try and double check the overall flatness here with this chisel a bit. I'm going to switch it round, just take care of a tiny bit at the other side, and then we should be ready. Okay, let's just check for my own pieces of mind. Yes. Right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, he's wandering a bit, but he may stay there. I'm just going to touch down this nut with a little bit of glue to hold it in place. Now it's the base of the nut that's going to stay. The top part of the nut can come out, and the whole thing about this is so that when you come to remove strings or refit strings, you're going to need to when you're taking them off, you're going to need to remove the outer ones first, come inwards, and when you're putting them on, put the D and the G on first, and that will hold the strings, hold the nut, sorry, the adjustable unit. Stop this little string, will you? It will hold the adjustable unit, in place and stop it from pinging out into space. Right, I'm just checking the position of everything here. That looks fine to me. That's going to stay there. That's nicely positioned. Okay, there we have it. So that's quite a bit of time and effort. Why have I taken that time and effort? You know the answer. It's because a guitar that plays and stays in tune is more important than a guitar that looks great, costs $1 million, has Gibson or anything else written on the headstock, but will not play and stay in tune. There's no point. And I know that James will know the difference between how this guitar now is when he gets it back and how easy it will be to tune it. I mean, it's not superhuman. It will occasionally need tuning, but you won't be hunting all the time to get it in tune. It will be mostly in tune when you pick it up, and certainly after a quick tune, it'll stay in tune when you play it. Right, so now we're going to recrown the files. I say this all the time. We're going to recrown the frets. And I'm going to use the medium end of the StewMac offset crowning file. And this is the old game of taking the frets that we've put flat spots on and using this concave file to round off the shoulders on the flat spots, so we end up with a fret that's shaped like a arch again. I looked at side on, and as I'm doing it, I'm making sure that I leave thin little strip of black marker pen on the top, and if I do that, then I've reshaped the fret whilst I can tell, because the top isn't touched. That means I haven't lowered the fret overall relative to the others. So I've retained the relative levelness that we were chasing earlier on with the fret leveling process. So that's why the marker pen does such a good job of telling us what's going on and where we are. So, other news in the Shires. Oh, by the way, speaking of news and things, I've been watching, those of you who know these YouTube-y things, I've been watching my revenue on YouTube going down. It's in part because I haven't posted much recently. I've got 5 more to post now they're uploaded. But it's also partly to do with the fact that after YouTube en masse switched on additional mid-roll advertising on my videos, all 750 of them, and after realising that that makes a really crappy viewing experience, it's hard enough watching my videos as it is, but without having thousands of ads shoved in every 5 minutes. And also ads that you can't switch off, you're forced to watch for 10 seconds or whatever the length is. Anyway, that was Google, YouTube's choice to make money, extra money. So I decided to go through all of my videos and switch that option off, all of them. So I've gone backwards to the type of straightforward, skippable advertising that was originally there, and just one at the start. I think that's about it. I don't think there are any more. But because of that, then YouTube, not only is it cut down my revenue, because obviously there aren't thousands of ads, impressions being made, so YouTube's making less, and so it makes less for me. But on top of that, there is also, people have evidence that the minute you choose not to be to show content riddled with ads and unskippable ads, then YouTube, its algorithm, decides not to show your stuff because it's not profitable for them. So in order to try and preserve the quality of experience, my stuff doesn't appear in so many feeds and all that. Now, honestly, I don't care that much, because the point of the videos, as I've probably said many times before, was always only, first and foremost, to do exactly what it does for me, which is to show people what I do, how I do it, and to allow them, prospective customers, to make up their minds whether they want me to do it guitar or not. And since I was doing the work anyway, it doesn't cost me any extra hassle, particularly since I don't do any editing. So I just put up what I've done, and it's done very, very well over the years, helping people who like what I do to make the decision to send their guitars to me. And some people, it makes them think I'm an absolute idiot, and they don't contact me, or they write something insulting. That's fine too, but it brings me the customers that I want. So I don't really need it to make me any money. But what was interesting in all of this, of course, is that it's clear that YouTube wants to, or even Google wants to push the world to a subscription model. Because obviously advertising, grudge advertising like this can't possibly work. The advertisers are desperate to flood to use the new platforms. Of course they are, but really they know as well that somebody being forced to watch 3 seconds of their ad and then clicking off it is clearly not a productive advertising spend. It's a grudge, we put up with it to get the free video stuff, right? And that's just a really depressing and crap situation for an advertiser. So it's the worst of the old-fashioned advertising model, if you like. So I think that Google knows its days are numbered. Their revenues will be telling them that long before we see a change. But so the only way for them to survive is to push this platform to a subscription-only model. And the quickest way to do that, they figure, is to make it so unpleasant to watch, to watch through all these interruptions that you'll have no choice but to pay them £5 a month or whatever the entry level is for an ad-free viewing experience. And that's why they keep on saying, do you want to trial our system? Do you wish your videos would, whatever it is, keep on playing in the background? Sign up for the premium service. They never say, do you wish we would stop filling your content with absolutely intrusive adverts that do nothing for anybody? They don't say that. Anyhow, so it's going to go down that way. But so I've been watching the numbers falling with interest. Now, what's quite funny about it is that because if you were dependent on YouTube to make money, Google has made it so that it wants to create an anodyne, inoffensive environment to make the most from its advertisers. Now advertisers get hot, itchy feet, or whatever it is, hot feet when content is sensitive or controversial, or they say, you look at the crap that's on YouTube and tell me that anyone really notices that. But where it can, Google has been desperately trying to create this bland, inoffensive environment into which its family-friendly advertisers will chuck money at Google for the advertising. And so it has penalised everybody, for talking about. It has this whole set of categories which, if you talk about sensitive issues or kind of important world issues that might be considered by some to be triggering or disturbing or upsetting, world events, and a volcano you can't talk about because somebody might have died in it and therefore it's triggering, and so on and so on and so on. Anyway, so Google's been kind of socially policing the airwaves for the longest while with a view to preserve as acceptable an environment for its advertisers as it can for the longest possible time. And of course what that practically means for someone like me is that the more stringent they get, and the more should I be dependent on their revenue, their ad revenue. If I were to make that an important part of my income, then it naturally follows that people like me would suddenly or progressively avoid talking about any controversial subjects. That's one of the reasons for avoiding them anyways, because you get people, abusing you for your views and so on. That's always the nature of expressing your viewpoint. But with Google, it also costs you demonetization of your content. Now, I've sort of, if there was a time where I don't think they'd done the thing with the advertising, but there was a time for a little while when I was getting $250 or $300 a month. And that's a reasonable addition to, help to pay the rent or whatever. However, since I cut back on its advertising, and since it's probably de-importantized me because I don't offer it a good environment to advertise in, just because I won't tolerate continual ads throughout the content, it's shut it back, so I'm earning very little, relatively speaking. And I said the other day that when it gets to a point that I'm earning, when I go below the $100 a month mark, then actually, it's a terrible thing. It's like the price I put on my freedom of speech. But at that point, there'll be no point avoiding sensitive subjects because I won't be earning enough to worry about anyway. So I've made a commitment that once I dip below $100, they can have it back, and I will be free to talk about whatever I want. Now, somebody the other day accused me of being a member of the EDL because I think it was because something to do with celebrating oak, which I really love as a material, and I think I certainly was talking about the when I look at the oak trees in my village, and they really stand for kind of medieval England and sort of days of pioneering shipbuilding, and you can look up and see the huge, great curved boughs in the trees that they would have cut to make certain sections of the ship, and without having to bend the wood, it was already bent. So and that always absolutely amazes me to be able to see that timber and know that so much of our exploration in the world, etc., and shipbuilding. Anyway, that apparently might not have been that alone, but apparently I think that got me labelled as an EDL member. I can't remember. I was accused of my something English, more-minded, Little Englander mentality or something. Maybe it could have been to do with something else I said, but it seemed to be connected to my love of oak. So there you go. So once you speak your mind about anything, you can expect to be thoroughly attacked anyway. So in a way, it's not really worth doing anyway. But it'd be nice to be less guarded about certain things in the world, like the current state of the politics we're all experiencing, which is about as significant thing as has happened in my lifetime, where we are with both the British general public and also mirrored in a way by the American general public, and the kind of divisions we see around these bizarrely oversimplified, polarized issues, etc., etc. And I just think that's kind of one of the most significant shifts or turns for the worst I've ever seen in my lifetime or ever experienced. And if we can't talk about that, then we are truly gagged by money. Gagged in case we lose this, and gagged in case we lose our job, gagged in case we lose our Google revenue, and so on and so on. So, dear Google, if you don't pay me, if it goes down below $100, I'm going to talk about whatever I want to talk about. And to hell with earning clicks from your grudge advertising. There was one that I've been watching some videos this morning, and there's one ad at the moment that seems to jump out every time I go to watch a video, and it's some shouting punk, bumfluff, mustachioed young guy who shouts, "You've got to listen to this," or something at the top of his voice. And of course, the producers have recorded it so that it literally screams at you it's 4 times louder than anything you were watching before. So it is actually straight up an assault on your hearing. And I have no idea what this punk is trying to sell, but I'll tell you something. If I actually stopped long enough to see if there was a company behind it, I would make it my business never to go near a single one of their products on that basis alone, to have been shouted at in my own earphones by some ignorant jackass. Anyway, so I think it's a terrible form of marketing and advertising. But hey, what do I know? I'm too old. I'm a boomer or something. And you can dismiss everything I think and feel with the words, okay, boomer, apparently. When somebody says that, I want to say to them, oh, you just wait. 45 years from now, you are going to be feeling so out of place. And all your smugness of being a 19-year-old, 20-year-old, and all your judgment will all have evaporated as you discover that you don't know what you are, who you are, and now you can see the end of your life coming, and you didn't all add up to what you thought it was going to be, and now you're completely confused and possibly, dare I say it, scared and lost without a purpose, and your hair's disappearing, and oh God, do you remember how you used to laugh loudly at people whose hair had gone, and now yours is gone? Oh God, it's so cruel, it's so unfair. Well, you just wait until real life catches up. Still, I must have been like that when I was young and stupid. But yes, I don't need you shouting at me through my earphones, you punk. Anyway, so yeah, below $100, that's it. I'm ungagging myself. And there'll be plenty of things to talk about. And you can take all of your revenues and shove them where the algorithms don't shine. Right, so I'm just taping off. Now I'm going to do the next bit off camera, which is another reason why it always takes longer. Well, it takes longer because you don't see this next bit. And this next bit is sanding out and polishing the frets. And I've added 2 stages into this in the last couple of weeks, so it's going to take even longer than usual. And on the plus side, I get to have the radio on for a minute and zone out, catch up on exciting world news. And the downside is that it takes me, I can have a cup of tea, so that's good. But the downside is that it takes me another 20 minutes longer. So I've added an extra stage in the sanding, which is going to be 400 grit paper. Between the crowning file grade and the 600 grit that I used to start with, I added 400 in, and then right at the end I will do a auto sol thing with Dremel. Okay, so I'm going to get my, look, here's my sandpaper ready. I've got brand new micromesh sheets. These have got so expensive. That's another con. You used to get, they come now like this for about 20 quid, 20 something pounds, right, for a set of pieces that size, right? It used to be twice that size for about 9 quid. Now they're 20 something pounds for half size, and I have to cut them in pieces to make them last. I mean, you know, just everything has gone up. Everything. Thanks to Brexit, thanks to pandemic, thanks to you tell me. It's all going up. All the parts that I buy for these guitars have gone up. Everything. Everyone's just put their prices up. Just keep going. More. And I haven't changed my prices. But I'll have to at some point. Because my books show it just going out out on parts. That's not true. We get by. But, you know, the proportion going out on parts is enormous now. Right, I'm going to unbend the ends of these strings, free them up, store them, and I'll come back when this is all done and we're ready to put new strings on. So I will stop this here. And here. I'm actually going to edit these bits. I think I have to get the silly hand clap out of the way. Didn't think of that, did I? Right, okay. Whew, polishing out done. I'm going to now give some oil back to this fretboard, which is very dry with after a clean with the old, what's that stuff called? Naphtha. Because not being a very dark wood, as soon as you take the oil out of it, it looks a bit pale and dusty. So giving it about a bit of life back to it with this lemon oil. Okay. Okay, now we're going to restring. Right, just a quick check. These were 10s, weren't they? Right, get the right scale. Yeah. Dense. Okay. So, what do we do? Right, here we go. Where are my strings? Strings are here. Okay, so we're going to restring. We're going to stretch the strings out. We're going to set the guitar action back. Often something down there changes, so it could be that we, without realising it, turn the screw things on there when the bridge is off. Actually, the bridge hasn't come off, but you know, it's not always, we can't always assume that that's at the right height once we restring it, so we just need to double check that. So as mentioned, when you come to restring this, start with the center 2 out. So we're going for the D and the G first. Oh yeah, just quickly before I put those on, let's just get a little bit of sandpaper in here. Remember, we said we were going to just soften this off a tiny fraction. Now I'm going to use a little piece of 400 grit. I'm going to fold it around a craft knife blade, the ever trusty craft knife blade, and I'm going to drop it in there, push it in there, and I'm going to just soften out, there you go, any gaps. And now with the lower E, I'm going to switch it round and I'm going to use the thick end of the thing. Thick end of the blade is what I'm trying to say, badly. Okay. Right, that was just a little check there. Right, so when we come to stringing up, we'll recommend get all your ducks in a row, or your string, your through holes all lined up. Makes it much easier to do because you're always working backwards if you're doing it on a bench like this. We start with the the D, I should say, and what I tend to do is to go through all the way, lay it in the slot, lay it in the slot at the other end, and then pull back 1 fret's worth, and then wind on, hold the held string taut and make it go over the loose string first time round, and then lift the loose string and direct the held string under the loose string the second time round. Now that's actually a fraction higher then I would really want this, but it's not too bad. If I had my time again, I would sand this down a tiny little bit more. Typically I like to have the strings resting on the, let me just check this, because if this actually, great, this actually is a little bit too tall. I am going to make a small adjustment. So that's interesting, that's quite stiff. So that wouldn't come off anyway, even if you wanted it to. So the way to get it off is to push it out with the grub screws, like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wind up the grub screws out of sight, and I'm just going to take a little bit of the footing off so that it doesn't sit as, sits a little bit lower. Okay, I need to turn this off because I'm getting warm again. So, in truth, I stuck that down fractionally before I was happy with where it was. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this on flat here, and I'm going to take off a little bit of the footing so it sits lower. It's nice and straight all the way around. Put that back in there. There you go, that's better. Put the DN, it's almost on the deck. Could have taken a fraction more. Actually, that's good enough, I think. All I care is that it's not, no, let's take a tiny bit more. What I don't want is I just don't want the lowest setting to be taller than we want the first fret action. That defeats the whole purpose of it. So I am going to just take a fraction more. Okay, it's a Sunday night in a mean town in the southwest. When I have to take some material off like that in a very straight line, I usually rock from side to side like a crazy person might, because I'm trying to keep the angle the exact same, and this way I can keep everything in place. So that should, if all's correct, in there. Right. Please make this correct. Thank you. That's practically on the first fret. That's where I want it. Okay, so same one again, through, pull back one fret. Of course, this time you have to go back to front like this. You can't see. Hold it. Grab hold of it, direct the held one over the loose one to begin with, and then under the loose one. So yanking it up and directing the held string under the second time around. And there we have the two that are going to hold our nut in place. Now in this situation, actually, it's so nicely snugly fitted there wasn't really any risk of it popping out anywhere, but it's not always the case, so I always advise stringing it and unstringing it in that sequence just to be on the safe side, because if you do it and you do the outside one last, it tends to flip the nut insert off to the side and across the room, sort of thing. Okay. Now we can do the other strings. Alright, so this is nice, all fitted perfectly well. A bit of Dremel goo from the autosol there. There was a time where I did the autosol thing at the end, and then I stopped doing it because I couldn't really see the benefit. But I've gone back to it because I just think it's a 5 or 10 minutes addition, and actually if it does improve the look a little bit, then why pass up the chance to make it look even prettier? It seems a false economy in time savings, really. So I've added it back in, and hopefully it will ensure beautiful shiny fretboards forevermore. Oh, lost my thing, not in line. Okay. So that's an interesting one to look out for in future when if you have other guitars, or if you get other Epiphones. Probably not just Epiphones, any Chinese-made guitar with a tunematic bridge. I think you'd probably find that when you look closely at it, the bridge probably is quite a way off the radius. And the way I checked was, rather than trying to map the radius down here on the bridge, I measured it across the actual last fret, which is a pretty good way of, saying whatever it says it's supposed to be in some manual, the truth is the radius is what the measurements are telling me at this last fret. And what I found just then is that the actual frets and the bridge are doing very different things, or quite different things, on the low E and on the G, which is not great, but the only way to solve it is a crude solution, and that's to file the saddle on the bridge, and it's because it's not made well enough in the first place. That's pretty much all you can say about it. But it's not surprising. I mean, it's a very crude process, and you can tell that by how crappy the rattling saddles are. Speaking of which, I've got to find the stuff to damp them down a bit. We'll do that once it's intonated. There's a misconception in nut slot cutting that, a misconception first of all on the part of the slot file makers, that you need a new set of, or a different set, a gauge of files for each gauge of strings. And actually, if you look at a nut, a generic nut like this Tusk Nut that plays perfectly well, and you see the size of the first fret slot, right, which they obviously make to cater for all gauges of strings, because otherwise it'd have to have a Tusq adjustable nut insert made differently for every gauge if that was important enough. But they don't, and they make one so it caters for everything from 8s through to probably 13s or something crazy like that. And guess what? All of them play beautifully without any trouble. So it goes to prove in practice that a nut slot has to be enormously oversized before the string will kind of wobble about sideways and cause any problems. But the people who have a vested interest in selling you numerous different sets, one for every gauge of string that you may ever use, of course aren't going to tell you that now. Right, so let's double check. We've got our action probably set right. We've got our first fret action to be set right now, so I can see that everything's kind of just about touching the deck, certainly on the treble side. So I'm going to wind the screw in, and I'm going to now carefully lift it and just get a little bit of clearance there. I'm going to follow up on the bass side and just get a little clearance there too. There we have it. And I'm going to get a basic tuning. Lovely. Not finished, so we take our nice clean fingers. I washed my hands in the bowl over there. Nice clean fingers, and we stretch out the strings between thumbs and forefingers hard. Now, realistically, you might need to do this plus some string stretches 3 or 4 times doing this, and quite a bit of string stretching to get this to stop detuning. But once you stretch the slack out, it will stay pretty much stabilized, and that means you can then play and forget it from that point onwards until you change your strings again. So I'm just going to do some kind of bedding in pulls just to get the strings really seated, and then I'm going to tune up again and see just how vastly out of tune it'll be. Obviously I'm going to take care when I get up to the thin strings because they're going to be too easy to break. Right, tune up. No pings you can hear. And again, stretch again, up and down all the strings. Now you'll probably find this is now starting to stabilize, and once we're there, it'll be only small amounts, and probably a few big bends on high notes will kind of stretch out the last of it. But the point being is, the longer you spend at this stage here, once you put some new strings on, the more rewarding your playing is going to be after that, because you won't waste time tuning. It's getting close. So once you've done a few of those, you want to do some stretchings. Now we'll go slightly out of tune again. Or not. So hardly any detuning, so that's stable in my book. Okay, so last things to check is the R the intonation. Well, let's check the action at the end just to be sure it is where we want it to be. So things move. Okay, that's low. That's low partly because we fixed the slot. There's my screwdriver, other one. So that's a little bit low. Let's just bring this up a tiny bit. A tiny bit over 1.5. .5, 1.1-ish, 1.2-ish. Good. Feeling great. Feeling groovy. Da, 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 da. That one. Oh no, I've said the words and the copyright zombies are going to have me. Right, check this. Jack socket is not loose. Check the strap buttons. They're tight. So it's good. And we'll plug it into an amp in a minute and we'll check for crackles and things and so on. But meanwhile, we'll just test out the, in fact, I'll do it the other way around. We'll test out the intonation Now the intonation is a funny one. People get very, very, very kind of particular and peculiar about it. The point about the intonation is there's one variable in it that makes a mockery of the precision that some people want in all the other variables. So, for example, people will spend weeks arguing about, oh, you've got to do it laying down, standing up, sitting down, in position, out of position, and all of those have, you know, there are implications of gravity on your neck and so on and so on. And actually, none of those arguments really make a hell of a lot of difference in the sense that the intonation is a length issue rather than a tuning issue. I suppose they're related very slightly, so that if you could argue that if your neck is leaning backwards under gravity, then technically it's stretching the string a fraction longer, which is why the string goes sharp because it's tighter, and the you could say that the intonation length is fractionally more, but it's minuscule, right? I mean, imperceptibly small. So we're talking about a distance, really, and you can do it standing up, you can do it with it on its back, it will still set it pretty well, right? But you know, when people go, oh, this is beautiful, what an action. When people get all iffy about it, they forget that in the midst of all of this, in the mix, is your fretting pressure, and everybody's fretting pressure is different from everyone else's, and your own fretting pressure is different one day from it is the other day, the next day. So the whole thing about spending thousands on a you know, spectroscopic oscilloscope or whatever you might do, tuner, when you can't actually guarantee me that my finger pressure when testing the intonation is going to be the same as yours, or even the same 2 days running, it makes a mockery of it. So for example, if I play an E, you can't hear obviously, but I'm going through the tuner, and I go, oh, there's an E, right? And I go, it's just about in tune. And I go, no it's not, it's sharp by miles, because that's some squeezing the hell out of it. So no two people fret with the same pressure. This all feels a bit sharp. Oh, those bloody saddles. Hear them? Mostly close. Flat. That was too long. Yes, that was quite a way back. And which one was sharp? E and the B was sharp. Push back, pull forward. Okay. Now I'm going to put this back on the bench to make any adjustment, because the other thing I despise about the Tune-o-matic bridge is its impossibly fiddly screw adjusters. It's a joke. They are a joke. Guess what? Look, they're almost directly underneath the strings, making them very difficult to get to. Now I'm going to push back and get a bit of length on that one. Push back that one, get a bit of length on that one. That one was okay, that one's probably too far away. Judging by everything else, I'll bring that one forward a bit and press it down. It's crap. What an awful design. And this one's too far away. So drag this one back into play. See, I'm having to come at it sideways, and you wonder why so many of these guitars have scuffed up screws there. It's because they're inaccessible. And that is because they were designed badly. But hey, you know, it's powered rock and roll for the longest while. A is a bit flat, fraction, a tiny bit. So we go again, put it down, get a look at it, flat, drag it towards me, which is which way? Oh, it's the other way. Okay, and that's run out of adjustment room, so that had better be in, or else that's that. Which is another thing I hate about the Tune-o-matic bridge. Pretty close, to be honest, but I still hate that about the Tune-o-matic bridge. Hey, thank God for that. One day I will learn some tunes to thrill myself and others with when the time comes to demo a guitar, because I don't have any. Why does it come onto lead? I didn't put it on lead. This thing is set on a preset. Staying in tune, look. that one. Yes, well, copyright strikes. That volume really is all on or all off, isn't it? Oh, that's because I had it in the middle, idiot. Oh God, what's that? That is. What did it do? I forgot where it goes. Oh yeah, that one. You won't believe it was 9:30 at night on a Sunday evening in an industrial estate, and I can turn the amp up as loud as I want. Well, you see that? Perfectly in tune still. There you go. That is it. That's all, folks. Looney Tunes type of sign off, but there we go. Boop. Magical. Oh shit, I've knocked off my papers. Magical wheelie amp goes back in its place, and the beautiful ES339 of James's needs a little bit more polish to get my yeah, great, hit the scratch plate hard, why don't you? Needs to get my fingerprints knocked off it, wiped off it, and then we put it in the Gibson bag for a transport back home to where James has made for me the perfect bit of packaging. It was absolutely wonderful. James copied the instructions, my instructions, to the T so well that I actually didn't have to think about what I was doing when I was unwrapping it, because I knew the terrain perfectly. It was like unwrapping one of my own. But then I have to tell you a little secret. I've never unwrapped one of my own, so this is like a very odd experience for me. And I found myself, I did it here actually, so the bubble wrap's all there, which I won't be using again for the way back, but I'll use fresh bubble wrap. But I'll keep it for padding for other packaging jobs. But yeah, so for the first time ever, I caught myself thinking, is this what I put people through? But I really make no apologies for that, because it's the absolute #1 priority is that I get the guitar back to you safely. And I occasionally somebody will say to me, Yeah, but hang on a minute. You know, somebody, I've sent it to you, or I've got a set. I've bought it from a seller, and I've paid them to send it to you, and now I have to pay you again for packaging to send it on to me. And it's a hard one to say, but what I have to tell people is that, or make it clear, that my number one responsibility is to get the guitar back to you in one piece. It's even more important in an odd sort of way than doing a great setup. That's important, but there's no point doing a great setup and then packaging it so badly that it doesn't survive the trip back. I might as well not have bothered. So my number one priority is to get the well set up guitar back to you. And I'm not going to rely on anyone else's approach, because I've done it nearly 900 times in a particular way, and in that 900 times I've not got a single damaged guitar or a single lost guitar in the whole thing. So of course I can't afford to change the system. I know it works, and I'm going to stick to the way it works, and that means using fresh material and being able to do it the way I know I have to do it to make it work. So there we have it, the adjustable Tusk Nut doing its business. No pings, beautifully lubricated, everything nice and shiny, leveled out. A couple of little dings down on this fret. I think it's between the strings. Is there a hint of a dent? Might be, I don't know, it's just the eye, but that's something I'm not going to chase out if it's not directly in the line of play. I'm not going to lose fret metal over it. But there we go, beautifully set up and done, ready to go back. So Sunday night, it's going to go in the temporary flight bag, or the Gibson bag, to go home just now in the car, safe and sound, and it's going to get packed up snugly to go on its trip back to James. So thank you for watching ES 339 on a Sunday night in Devon. Now I'm going to switch off the cameras, and I'm going to heat up the place, switch on the dehumidifier, and I'm going to do me 2 coats of purple acrylic.